Joe King walks out on stage and says,
"Hello, yes, my name's Joe King. I'm not joking, though I do prefer to be called Juris Dr. King. So, actors have joined the writers by going on strike. And no, that's not a bowling reference. Womp womp. Okay, but instead, in reference to refusing to work until their demands are met. And you can see on social media all the different actors out there picketing. And I only said actor because there are some who believe that the term actress is outdated, and I'm working on being more politically correct these days. But I still feel weird as a straight man talking about how sexy certain actors' asses are, or how I'd love to motorboat a certain actor's cans. But anyway, the actors' strike, like the writers' strike, is mostly over how streaming has changed the economic dynamics of the entertainment industry.
You cannot change the business model as much as it's changed and not expect the contract to change too,
said Fran Drescher, SAG-AFTRA president, in a press conference announcing the strike.
We're not going to keep doing incremental changes on a contract that no longer honors what is happening right now with this business model that was foisted upon us. What are we doing? Moving around furniture on the Titanic?
An economic problem for the studios is what COVID has done to box office numbers, as box office remains about 20 to 25% off the pre-pandemic pace.
We've talked about disruptive forces on this business and all the challenges we're facing. The recovery from COVID, which is ongoing. It's not completely back,
said Disney Chief Executive Bob Iger.
This is the worst time in the world to add to that disruption.
Easy for him to say at $27 million per year salary plus bonuses. Anyway, much of the force of the demands from the Writers and Actors Guilds began during the pandemic. As streaming became all the rage, as subscriber growth became the priority of many of the studios. It seems with streaming that there has to be a transparency about where the money is coming from and where it's going. Until that gets resolved, this issue will keep coming up. A problem with this is that streaming as it's currently constituted offers no easy metric like box office or TV ratings to establish residuals, which has long been a huge part of how writers and actors have made a living. So ultimately, this is not going to get resolved until the guilds are able to get a higher percentage of the streaming service residuals. However, that can get worked out. And we here at the Joe King Show hope that that is done sooner rather than later, as it has become increasingly more difficult to book dead celebrities on the Joe King Show compared to Saturday Night Live. On Saturday Night Live, the hosts get to interact with Chris Farley, John Belushi, Phil Hartman, Gilda Radner, etc., etc. But on the Joe King Show, yikes, it's just me. Therefore, we know that at least the dead are dying for the strikes to end.
King walks off stage and onto another stage, sits at a seat behind a desk and says,
"Please welcome to the show the recently departed, one of the classiest and greatest performers of all time, Mr. Tony Bennett."
Tony Bennett emerges from behind a curtain and waves at the audience. Applause, applause, applause. Bennett walks over and sits at a seat next to King's desk. King:
"Welcome to the show, Tony."
Bennett: "Thank you for having me." King:
"How's the afterlife been treating you so far?"
Bennett: "Oh, it's been absolutely wonderful. I can't complain one bit." King:
"Very good. Now, you were born Anthony Benedito in 1926 to John, a grocer, and Anna, a seamstress."
Bennett: "Yeah, my father had immigrated from Italy in 1906, and my mother was born in the U.S. from Italian immigrants who came over in 1899.
King: "Very good. Any mob ties?"
Bennett: "Whoa, are you serious?"
King: "Sorry, I'm trying to ask some tougher questions of our guests here anyway. Your dad died when you were only 10?
Bennett: "Yeah, that was truly tough. It was during the Great Depression, and it left my mother alone to raise me and my siblings. She had to sell the store and work as a seamstress, and despite our meager means, my mother was uncompromising towards her craft, refusing to work on dresses she considered shoddy. We were desperate for money, but she couldn't bring herself to do something she felt was beneath her. She became my inspiration for insisting on singing only quality songs."
King: "Very good. Now, speaking of songs, you already were performing around that time."
Bennett: "At age 10, I sang at the opening of the Triborough Bridge alongside Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. I then attended the High School of Industrial Arts, where I studied music and art, but I had to drop out at 16 to help my mother financially. I took odd jobs throughout the city, elevator operator, usher, library page, while also putting my talents to work as a singing waiter. I would go back to the kitchen where two Irish waiters would teach me the song, then go out into the dining room and perform for an extra tip.
Okay, very good. And then you were drafted into World War II, where you eventually joined the front line in Europe.
Bennett, it was terrifying, demoralizing experience for me. I saw things no human being should ever have to see. I had a front row seat of hell. Anybody who thinks that war is romantic obviously hasn't gone through one. It was a nightmare that's permanent. King.
Okay, and towards the end of the war, you sang under the stage name Joe Barry.
Bennett. Yeah, you know, Bob Hope said it was a terrible stage name.
King, is that right?
Bennett. You see, what happened was, after the war, I went back to being a singing waiter while also studying at the American Theater Wing under the GI Bill. And my break came in 1949 when Pearl Bailey heard me sing and asked me to open for her at Greenwich Village, and she invited Bob Hope to the show. After the show, Bob said to me, "Come on, kid, you're going to come to the Paramount and sing with me." But first he told me he didn't care for my stage name and asked me what my real name was. I told him my name is Anthony Dominic Benedetto, and he said, "Well, we'll call you Tony Bennett then." And that's how it happened. A new Americanized name, the start of a wonderful career and a glorious adventure.
Okay, very good. And in 1950, you signed with Columbia Records.
Bennett. That's right. Mitch Miller signed me, and he warned me not to impersonate Frank Sinatra, and I began my career as a crooner of commercial pop tunes, with my first big hit being Because of You.
Okay, and that was followed by other hits such as Cold Cold Heart, Blue Velvet, and Stranger in Paradise.
Bennett. My songs were being played a lot in jukeboxes and ice cream parlors and bars across the country before rock and roll came around.
Okay, right, so tell us, what was it like for you when rock and roll hit?
Bennett. Well, around 1955, when rock and roll really hit, the dynamic of the music industry changed and it became harder and harder for existing pop singers to do well commercially. But I nevertheless continued to enjoy success.
Okay. Now, I found this interesting. For about a month in August and September of 1956, you hosted an NBC Saturday night television variety show, The Tony Bennett Show, as a summer replacement for The Perry Como Show.
Bennett. Yeah, that was great fun. Okay.
I don't know if you know this, but before the writer's strike, I was the producer of the #1 audio-only sketch comedy show on the video platform YouTube, featuring an all-dead cast that was politely spoofing Saturday Night Live, another NBC Saturday night variety show.
Bennett, is that right?
Okay, yeah.
Bennett, well, good luck with that, but do you mind if we get this focus back on me?
Okay, of course. Okay, you continue to enjoy success in the 50s into the 60s with a leaning towards jazz with albums like Cloud 7, The Beat of My Heart, Basie Swings, Bennett Sings, where you collaborated with Count Basie, and In Person.
Bennett. And during that time, I also built up the quality of my nightclub act, followed in the path of Sinatra, and I had a highly promoted performance at Carnegie Hall, and sang on the initial broadcast of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Okay. And then in 1962, you came out with perhaps your biggest solo hit, I Left My Heart in San Francisco.
Bennett. While on tour in 1962, my longtime pianist, Ralph Sharon, found sheet music to a song about San Francisco in a clothing drawer and suggested we play while in the Bay Area. When I eventually recorded it, Columbia put it on the B-side of a single, thinking it would be little more than a regional crowd pleaser. Instead, it went gold and I received my first 2 Grammys from it.
Okay, very good. But then the Beatles exploded and the British invasion occurred, as less attention was spent on pop standards and jazz compared to rock.
Bennett. Well, back in the 60s, I was told I had to change my music for the kids to accept me. Yet through the years, every age responds to my singing, even though I haven't changed a thing.
Okay. You know, that reminds me of my situation where I'm putting out audio-only material on YouTube despite the advent of videos.
Bennett. Okay, but why don't we swing this back to me, okay, Chief?
Okay, of course, okay. So in 1965, you performed in March in the Selma to Montgomery marches.
Bennett, I was a big believer in the civil rights movement, and it meant everything to me to get to participate in it.
King, very good, okay. And then you ran into an issue when Clive Davis took over Columbia in 1967 and wanted you to change your style.
Bennett, it seemed like the world was turning upside down. When the bean counters take control, which is all Clive Davis was, as he wasn't a musician, things go down the tubes.
Okay, which led you to start your own record label, Improv.
Bennett, yes, and I recorded some songs that ended up becoming favorites, like What Is a Thing Called Love?
Okay, but in the following years, your life started to spiral a bit.
Bennett, things were out of control. I divorced my first wife, developed a drug addiction to cocaine, started the independent record label, which ultimately failed, entered into an unhappy second marriage, and sank deeply into debt. I had an axe over my head. I was spending more than I was making on advertising, publicity, and all. It was a rough time. And in 1979, I nearly died from a cocaine overdose after being told that the IRS was about to seize my house. I passed out in the bathtub. I could have died, and after that I realized I had to get my life in order.
Okay, which you did.
Bennett. Yeah, my son Danny became my business manager, which helped me tremendously financially. And he started booking me in small theaters and colleges so that my image wasn't solely Vegas. And I re-signed with Columbia in 1986 with Creative Control and released the album The Art of Excellence, which was my first album to chart since '72.
Then you got into the mind of younger audiences by getting booked on Late Night with David Letterman and eventually Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Simpsons, where you were the first celebrity to lend your voice as yourself, The Muppets, and MTV, including MTV Unplugged with Tony Bennett.
Bennett. That one was easy. I was unplugged my whole career. But with all those shows, I realized that young people had never heard those older songs. Cole Porter, Gershwin, they were like, who wrote that? To them, it was different. If you're different, you stand out.
And Saturday Night Live even paid tribute to you with an impression by Alec Baldwin, and you were even on the show.
Bennett. I got a kick out of that, yeah. I said on there my name was Phony Bennett.
Very good. Then, my God, even into your 80s, you were still performing, famously with Lady Gaga.
Bennett. Pablo Picasso, Jack Benny, and Fred Astaire. Those guys, right up to the day they died, they were performing. If you are creative, you get busier as you get older.
But you ran into some hot water in September 2011 when you said on the Howard Stern show that George W. Bush personally told you that he made a mistake invading Iraq.
Bennett. Here, all I'll say about that is this. There is simply no excuse for terrorism and the murder of nearly 3,000 innocent victims of the 9/11 attacks on our country. My life experiences, ranging from the Battle of the Bulge to marching with Martin Luther King, made me a lifelong humanist and pacifist, and reinforced my belief that violence begets violence and that war is the lowest form of human behavior.
Okay, and you still barely slowed toward the end of your life despite your Alzheimer's diagnosis. Even when names, places, and recent memories eluded you, you still were able to perform in concert and nail performances of songs you had first learned 60 years ago.
Bennett. The public deserves nothing but the best, so you don't give them any junk. Don't give them anything that's going to make a quick buck and be forgotten. Don't do anything unless it's top quality. And so I did that until the end.
Well, we're running out of time. We just want to let you know that it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we hope that you'll be a musical guest on Saturday Night Live when that comes back on the air.
Bennett. I'd love that. Thank you.
Tony Bennett, everybody.
Applause, applause, applause.
That's all the time we have for this show, but tune in the next one where we interview another deceased guest. Until then, I'm Joe King, and I'm not Joe.